I'm Tom King, and I'm the founder of Toolkit.law, and we're here with one of America's preeminent immigration attorneys. We're here with Ruby Powers, who is a board-certified immigration and nationality attorney. She happens to practice out of my jurisdiction in the state of Texas to the 80 countries with English-based legal systems. Rules will be different for you, but here we're focusing on today the United States immigration application process, which seems to be in the news a fair amount. Ruby, thank you for joining us. How long have you been practicing immigration law?
17 years, I think this year. So after, and then my law firm is almost 16 years old, and I've been exclusive to immigration this whole time, and even added more federal litigation, including like mandamus cases. But like you, I've run my law firm in different places, including from Dubai and Turkey, and
Oh,
in the U.S. Yeah.
Istanbul. Don't you just love Istanbul?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's go ahead and start. You put together a presentation for us. What do you have to
Yeah.
share on the U.S.
Okay.
immigration application process?
So there's so much going on. One of the things that makes immigration complex is we're dealing with in the U.S. is that we're dealing with different departments, and fun fact, we really haven't had a lot of laws passed regarding immigration for like 25 years, not that many. It's really a lot of policy interpretations, executive orders, and case law. So we have to keep a myriad of all of these changes, which makes it sort of hard to do more than do anything in addition, other than immigration or maybe one other area of law. So, board certified practices for about 16 years and practice for 17 years. I'm an adjunct professor of law practice management. I have a podcast about law practice management. So, done a lot of advocacy. So, like I was mentioning, we've got a lot of different agencies. Back in 2003, there was a big change. That's when a lot of times, if you're sort of like the OG, you talked about INS, and now they have what they created Department of Homeland Security, and they took about like 26 agencies underneath it, including USCIS, ICBP, a lot of the ones that impact immigration. We
Now,
also, so
you
not.
just used the term OG. Is that a legal term that people in other, okay, we're talking to 80 countries. What does OG mean, Ruby?
Isn't it like original gangsters?
Yes, that's it. The original gangster. Okay,
Well, I
okay,
mean, we're throwing in a lot of little acronyms. I figured we should have fun.
okay.
So, so we have Department of Homeland Security, which has USCS under it. So when you're filing a lot of things inside the country, that's what you're dealing with. When you have the Department of State, it's when you're dealing with like consular processing, and consulates, embassies, that type of thing. The Department of Labor is where the one we're mostly dealing with like labor certifications, LCAs, that type of thing, mostly just employment based matters. And then Department of Justice, which is not listed right on this slide, but that's the one where the Executive Office of Immigration Review holds immigration court. So at a very minimum, we're dealing with DHS, DOS, DOL, and DOJ. Fun fact. And then we have to pay attention to the state law, even though our area is federal, because the way that states interpret things like marriage or crimes, we have to see how that interplays on the federal level. So it can be very robust and difficult in those situations. So I think when in doubt, team up with an attorney maybe locally or has a specialty to be able to help get that experience.
What a great thing you pointed out about the interpretation of law. And I immediately thought of what happens if a husband and his wife come over and
Uh-huh,
They're from Mexico, where the age of consent is 12, and this 40-year-old man has married a 12-year-old girl, and they want to come
uh-huh.
over, husband and wife. Isn't that exactly what you're talking about? How different jurisdictions have to interpret?
Right, right. And I haven't had that exact set of facts, but usually where it's officiated, it's usually legal according to the US federal government, but there are sometimes like polygamy we don't recognize. And that was an issue we had a lot with Afghan cases, where it was it was legal and things like that. So sometimes you have to, like, one of the ones I was thinking about was common law marriage, for example. What are we, like, one of seven or eight, I don't know how many states that have common law, and that really annoys the federal government because there's not a piece of paper necessarily that says, hey, this couple's married. So we usually go tell our clients, go get a register an informal marriage, or just go get really, like, legally married or something like that. But there's a lot of different implications and things like that, for other things like taxes and a whole bunch of stuff and assets. So anyway, but we could go down a rabbit hole on that if we wanted to. But yeah, but the common law marriage is something that we have here in Texas, and so we've been able to use that to our advantage. But we usually need to go get them to register to make sure that they have a document to say that. Um, and another thing, we're just speaking about marriage, I guess, is that sometimes people ask, like, well, if they got married in another country, is that still legal here? Well, there's a foreign affairs manual that gives a lot of guidance as to what type of documentation that the U.S. government's looking to see if it's valid or not. But the bottom line is that if it's legal where it was officiated, more or less it's legal. It's going to be reviewed as legal in the U.S. But some of the times it gets confusing when there's things like um, these different types of marriages are more religious, but not a legal component. Sometimes it's not legal until you go register it. So that's things you have to keep in mind. Okay, so just to sort of think about a broad spectrum in immigration, we have a lot different way avenues, let's say, that you can get your status, let's say. So it could be family-based matters, like you think about married an American, or an American petitions for their parents. So it's based off of relationship, and not all relationships work. Like brother sister is actually one, but if you're from Mexico, it could be like a 22-year wait. So sometimes people consider that a non-option. There's employment based, and so there could be short term, for example. Like they hear a lot about H-1Bs and E-2s and TNs visas, but then there's like could actually get a green card and legal permanent residency. There's a lot of humanitarian options like asylum, victim of a crime, victim of trafficking, Violence Against Women Act. Diversity visa is a lottery, is one where list of countries that normally don't come to the US very often. They create a lottery, and if you get chosen and you pass all the way through and don't have any other issues, then you could possibly get a green card.
What
Um,
are some of those countries?
well, and it changes based off of the number of people coming. Like in the past, it was like, I think like Bulgaria or Turkey, like certain places in Africa. You can just Google diversity visa lottery, and it's quite fascinating. And it really does ebb and flow depending on where the volume is for certain countries and nationalities and what's going on in those countries. Um, and then for the most part, in many cases, you either can obtain your a visa or your path for a green card here in the US, or usually with USCIS, or you could be doing it through consular processing. And consular processing could be a combo of using USCIS and the Department of State, or a lot of Department of State. So I don't want to get too complicated, but a lot of times I have clients all over the world, and we're helping them on immigration, US federal immigration matters. Um, so there's lots of different things to consider with family-based immigration, and including what we call immediate relatives. Immediate relatives have a lot more benefits. They're the spouses and parents and minor children of U.S. citizens. It doesn't mean that, like, there's no wait whatsoever. There still could be a wait, but some of the benefits, there's no visa cap, and you're not on the visa bulletin waiting. And then there's also some other benefits for your adjustment of status. And for most family-based options, you start with what's a form called I-130, and then you either do consular processing, use National Visa Center, or you do adjustment of status. And there's lots of different things like, is that relationship valid? You're looking at a lot of civil documents. You're looking at, how did that relationship get established? A lot of times I found people were not divorced to who they thought they were. Sometimes couples find out they weren't really married to the person they thought they were. So fun
Oops.
times. Yeah. But that doesn't happen that often, but it just does happen every once in a while. And if you want to, you can look at the visa bulletin State Department has. You can sort of get a feel for like the different processing times. There's a lot of different family-based issues, like they could be concerned about is there marriage fraud? There was a lot of different movies in the past, like Green Card with Jar Depardieu, and then there's like The Proposal. A lot of those things were based off of like the concern that marriage there was people were getting married for just for the green card, and if they ever do make that finding, it could be really 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 hard to overcome that. But don't get all your understanding of how immigration works based off those movies, because as an immigration attorney I'm finding all the things wrong with those movies, but anyway, they are entertaining. Or like even like the 90-day fiance or something like that, I don't know, but
I've
uh
got to say the current news is pretty entertaining too.
yeah, we don't. Well, apparently, recently there was a proposal of some type of a citizenship reality TV show. I did a video on it recently. I mean, about the news. I couldn't believe it. But there's a lot of nuances about trying to allow, to protect children in the process. Same-sex marriage was recognized a handful of years ago. It wasn't before. There was a conflict between like state and federal law for a while. All other things to consider: conflict of interest. If you're representing a couple and they break up and they're or get divorced, like you usually have to excuse yourself from that case because of the conflict of interest, and you have to explain all of that in advance so that they understand that. In employment base, there's lots of different options, but for the most part, you got to find a company for the most part that wants to sponsor you. And by doing so, you need to also have an underlying visa status. So, for example, if you were going to do the perm labor certification process, a lot of people say sponsorship, certification, perm. You need to stay in a status while that's pending, like an L1B or an H1B or something. You can't just have the green card and be in the country, green card pending. So if you don't have a visa underlying status to be here, you need to be outside. And that's what's sort of beautiful about a lot of these options is that you could get the green card through employment based abroad through consular processing. But in my experience, not that many companies are willing to go out on a limb for an employee without them working simultaneously for them. But there's also ways where people with extraordinary ability and education and management can get the green card and their status. There's this other one that was really big during the last administration and sort of slowing a bit, but they call the national interest waiver. And what there's a allows a person who can just on their own merit, no job offer needed, be able to get a green card. This was so popular, there's a big wait right now, but it's something exciting for people. Perm is that labor certification. You have to show that there's no one else who can do that job. There's a labor shortage, and you test the labor market. It's actually quite. You can even have unskilled workers do it, and skilled different levels. And so this is very great opportunity to get legal permanent residency. And then there's some other categories under religious workers, special immigrant juvenile. Um, and then the one that people talk about a lot, that the 800,000 to million plus, that you show or create or preserve 10 full-time jobs. There was also the gold visa, but I don't even think that's in law or legal yet. But there that was announced sometime in the last couple of months that I think was supposed to rival the EB-5, but the EB-5 exists, and the other one I think is still in some type of moment of creation. We do are bound by a lot of old laws that house where asylum law and refugee law comes from. A lot of times people think it's easy. It is really not easy. You really have to prove that you have past persecution and or fear of future persecution on one of five protected grounds: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or a membership in a particular social group. There's been a lot of changes to make it even more difficult. It's like, for example, if you enter through other countries, you have to prove why you didn't apply through asylum in those other countries, depending on when you might have entered, how you might entered. So, like, or if you lived in another country for a long time. So there's a lot of different factors. If anyone is doing work in asylum or refugee, like you really need to be on top of all the changes. The temporary protected status is, even though the word temporary is in the title, a lot of people who receive this sort of get comfortable with the idea that they're going to have it forever. We have some individuals from like El Salvador and Honduras have had it almost like 24, 20 something years. But just recently in the news, they talked about discontinuing for Venezuela. This last Monday, just recently from the Supreme Court said that they can discontinue. And then they've also been announcing the discontinuing for Ukraine, Afghanistan, some Haiti, and some other Cameroon, some other countries, which is a big concern because a lot of the reasons why people applied from those countries has still not gone away. And
Right.
so they're having, yeah, which is usually like extraordinary conditions, armed conflict, you know, civil unrest, everything. Deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, we talk about Dreamers, that came out in summer of 2012 under Obama. Even though it's like, what is that, 13 years old already? There's
It is.
still not, yeah, there's not really, there's no permanency to it. Fun fact, the oldest DACA recipient this June, mid-June, will be 44. So they're not kids anymore. But a lot of them are married and pillars in the community have kids, and some of them are becoming grandparents. And anyway, but they're like in terms of finding other forms of relief through adjustment of status. There's some other humanitarian options like military parole in place, some deferred action. Some of these discretionary humanitarian options are starting to go away under this administration. So even though they might exist, they might go away at some point soon, or there's fear of them going away. So there's just concerns about whether to pursue them or not. There's victims of crime, the U visa. Um, they are currently taking about 15 years right now. I have found cases where like the crime was 22, 23 years old, and I found a jurisdiction that approved the certification. But there's some places where if it's over a couple of years, they won't certify it. There is
Right.
no law that says you can't certify it over a certain year. It really can be jurisdiction to jurisdiction, unfortunately. But the big crimes we see usually are domestic violence, and aggravated robbery, aggravated assault. Usually the ones that we see the most frequently. T visa is not just for like sex trafficking; it's also for labor trafficking. So some employment-based cases can foot the bill, like not taking away their passport, saying that they can't do certain things, having to live a certain place, not having control over their autonomy. There's certain being afraid to be able to break free of labor contractual agreement. So those don't take as long as a U visa. I usually find the more I'm out there in the space that I find more U visa and T visa individuals, but they just don't know that they qualify for that. So I'm always looking for those. There's the Violence Against Women Act, and that one is also for men as well. It's not gender specific, even though the title is deceiving. And then, and this can include not just spouses, but children and parents. There's been a very big uptick in people filing for that. I don't see the diversity. A lot of times people apply on their own and then they hire us when they're at the end of the process trying to get it done before the fiscal year ends. But the diversity visa can be a little bit cumbersome. Just because you're chosen or you think you win doesn't mean you actually win. You have to have everything completed before the fiscal year ends. And sometimes you can get really close to the wire on that. Adjustment of status is like I was mentioning, is when you do it inside the country for a green card process. And consular processing is when you're doing it, the process abroad and ultimately waiting for an appointment, usually an appointment. Sometimes it might have been waived at the consulate or embassy. So a lot of things that we have to consider is like unlawful presence, because unlawful presence was created in April 1st, 1997. So we usually have to ask a lot of questions like, when did you come in? When did you leave? What was your status? Did you have things pending? And all of that sounds tedious, but it's so relevant. Like you sometimes come down to counting days. I'm serious, counting days as to whether they triggered a bar or not. We've become, I'd say, experts on unlawful presence in the bars, because I used to do waivers a lot before there was the provisional waiver, which is another opportunity where people can not be outside the country very long. A lot of times people had to stay out for a year or two to come back in. It's complicated.
Did you
Uh,
ever
but
have, did you ever
yeah,
case one extra day cost them?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Like, and then you go down into the law and you're like, okay, so if it's just like a couple of hours within a day, does that count as a day? You know, and you're like, yeah, I think it does. And it can also go the other way, like by establishing if an individual is a US citizen, the law changed based off of the year that they were born. And if like their parent didn't live enough time in the United States before they were born, they might not be able to pass it on. And that's another place where we've had to get out a chart and calculate. It gets really depressing when you're like really close and you're like, isn't there more time that your parent was here? And you can't change the history, you know? And so inadmissibility and waivers, there's a lot. So one of the biggest things to note is you might have a blemish, let's say, an admissibility, fancy word. It could be you lied to the government, you have some type of communicable disease, a crime, mental health thing that they think is going to keep hurt other
Yeah,
people or something like that.
those
Yeah.
qualify as blemishes.
Well, you know, inadmissibility sounds like a scary legal term. As I usually, when I explain this to law students, I say, like, they're scanning you. They're like scanning you and they're like, okay, do you have any problems? And is that problem going to affect other people? And if they have one of these and they think you have one or a perceived one, then is there a waiver for that? And do you qualify for it? Because sometimes you don't qualify for a waiver. And so those are things to consider. You want to have a really good, experienced individual to team up to help you. And then, you know, there's a lot of different aspects of ethics and make staying on top of all the changes. Like I'm on WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups. I'm on so many listservs. I'm actually going to a liaison meeting tonight. I was at a conference in DC this weekend. Like if you literally go away from immigration for more than like a couple of days, you're behind. It's that intense right now. So I'm in Houston, and people can reach out to me, but I'll go ahead and stop sharing. But I just wanted to. This is sort of like how to reach me if you want to. But what questions did we not cover? Because I tried to give a good overview.
Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
going to go ahead. You should see on your screen now a help sheet that we put together to complement your presentation. So what I'd like us to do is let's go ahead and scan this and let's see if there's anything else you want to comment on. So when we look, first of all, at the US application process, Ruby, starting on the green column, do you see anything in particular that catches your eye that you want to comment on?
So what I didn't talk a lot about the National Visa Center is it's sort of like this holding center, I guess you could say. It's sort of like a bridge between USCIS and the consulates. And so like let's say you file an I-130 petition and it gets approved and you're wanting to and your family member's abroad. Well, it'll go to the National Visa Center and then they'll say, "Okay, pay your fees and give us all these documents." And so once you do that, then they'll say your case is documentarily qualified or DQ, and then you wait. And the reason why is because there's all these embassies and consulates around the world, and they all have different processing times, and they're really busy and slammed and don't have enough staff. And so the NVC is a place where that holds on to it and sort of that middleman. And they collect documents, scan, upload, or it's gotten a lot more efficient. So that's what the NVC's role. Medical exams, you can, if you do adjustment of status, you do it here with the USCIS civil surgeon. If you do it abroad, you do it with one of the medical examiners that's authorized by the consulate embassy. And really the vaccinations required to differ depending on if you're in the US or outside, age, and what vaccinations are available. And also when it's happening. Like in the fall, it's usually in winter, you need to do a flu vaccine, for example. The summer, not so much. But medical exams, it's an extension of your visa appointment, and they're checking to make sure you don't have a communicable disease, or you don't have something that'll put you or other people at risk, like tuberculosis, for example, or if they think you have a drug or alcohol problem. Or they'll also scan your body for tattoos for potential gang or criminal activity. Um, Country specific issues, yeah, there's so much that goes on that certain countries are really care about certain issues. Certain ones have more fraud sensitivity than others. Some don't have as much business activities happening in the consulates, so they're faster. Fraud and misrepresentation is really important because you have to look at the elements of fraud. And sometimes it's not fraud or misrep, but it's a misunderstanding. But once there's a finding, it can be very, very hard to overcome it. And the waiver of it requires a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident spouse or parent to have a qualifying relative to overcome that waiver. And not everybody has that. So it can almost be like a nail in the coffin type of a thing. Interview preparation is really important because you want to be ready for whatever questions might be asked and know why they're asking them. I was prepping a client that's going to Sri Lanka uh, really right now, and just sort of walking through what to expect. It helps them feel more at ease. Wait times, priority dates. We talked a little bit about that with the visa bulletin. And the K-1 visa, that's the fiance visa. For the most part, it's when they can't be legally married, but they write saying, we're going to get married as soon as the individual gets here within 90 days. And you show a lot of proof of the relationship. You need to have seen each other within the last 2 years. There is a waiver of that, but I think it's really hard to overcome that. And then when you come to the US, then you need to get legally married and file for the rest of the green card process. We talked about the diversity visa
We
and
did.
denials and reapplication options. You really have to, when people say, well, what should I do if I get a denial? Well, you read the denial. What is it? Is it overcomable or not? And then, or is it better to appeal or do a motion to reopen, or is it better to just reapply? A lot of strategy involved in that because just because you filed something before and you file it again doesn't mean they don't look at the old application. It's completely a fair game.
Let's go ahead
Um,
and jump to the right side because we got another side of this help sheet to do. What else
yeah.
stands out on you? Which boxes did we miss?
Well, work and travel permits are really essential, but some visa options allow it. Some, while you're pending a case, allow it. In most states in the US, you can't get a driver's license without a valid ID or work authorization. And getting a social security number is so important. And most times nowadays you won't get it without having your work authorization. So that allows you to get bank accounts, social security, a credit, it just opens, it's like the key to opening doors. If you've never done a biometrics, fingerprints, and a photo before, then they require it with most applications. Interviews used to be waived for certain matters, and now we're pretty much seeing interviews all over the place. Marriage, even parents, usually parent petitions were waived. Let's see. We talked about marriage based and being a truthful, real relationship. We talked about TPS. Asylum based adjustment is when you have asylum approved and you can apply. The policy says with you can file immediately after approval, but they cannot adjudicate until you prove that you've been here 1 year. That's a little confusing. It policy came out like a year and a half ago or so. But that's awesome for people to start getting their green card as soon as possible. Student visas were in the news a lot recently. They reversed their whole trying to cancel them, but unfortunately, some people had already left the country. But it is another non-immigrant visa option. Public charge is about making sure you have enough money to sponsor someone. And you look at the I-864P for proof of the number, and that number goes up every day, every year in March. But the I-864 is the form you fill out. And you need to have a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident who is your sponsor. They don't have to know you really. They don't have to be they could be your friend or neighbor or whatever.
So
We
when
did,
we jump to the back half of the
yeah.
help, special programs and exceptions.
Well, we talked a lot about the ones in the blue. I think I mentioned all of those. In I didn't mention the Cuban Adjustment Act. That's been a bit in flux with a lot of Cubans that entered on the 220A. But there was a case recently called Q Lee that's something worth looking at that could be beneficial along those lines. Deferred enforced departure, that is something that is very discretionary. We're not sure how much that's going to be used under this administration. And a lot of redesignations for TPS are probably not going to happen with the revocations that we're starting to see or the lack of continuing of cases.
Last
Um,
column, hearing basics.
All right. Woo. Immigration court is a whole nother thing under the Department of Justice. Like I said, Executive Office of Immigration Review. Normally, you get a notice to appear. It says, "Hey, you have to go to court, and these are the reasons why." And then usually your first hearing is a master calendar hearing. Usually, they're just asking about the pleadings and your language, your address, and what you're going to apply for. Individual hearing is really where the whole thing goes on show. Why are you eligible for these different forms of relief? And we have a lot of backlog right now. So I'm even getting cases into 2029 around the country. Today I got one in November 2026. Language is so important because it could even be Portuguese, Angolan Portuguese versus Brazilian Portuguese, and it can mean a whole another result. Also, representation, having someone experienced in immigration court while representing you is essential. That your life is on the line. There's lots of different motions and appeals. Removal orders are very serious. There's very few options to overcome them, but some things are time barred or situational barred. In absentia orders can have huge consequences. Can ban you for 5 years, no waiver over that. But if you can try to reopen it and move to another form of relief, that is great. Remote hearings, some judges are allowing WebEx hearings, some are not. We're starting to see a trend where they're denying options for having WebEx, and they're requiring people to attorneys to go in person. Prosecutorial discretion is more or less dead. Had expanded.
Okay.
uh, well, we're closing up. I'm getting to the point real fast here. So, but for the most part, under Biden, it expanded a lot, and pretty much any requests that have been made are pretty much not going to be entertained. And I'll just say that I did almost no motions to reopen under the Trump 1.0, and I did a ton under Biden. I think if I do any motions to reopen under the administration currently, it's probably have to be very, very strong. Otherwise, it's probably not going to have a lot of option for success. Um, yeah. So, but court, I usually find attorneys don't handle court plus employment plus family plus humanitarian. They usually maybe handle two of the four or three of the four, but to do all four, it takes a lot of playing 5D chess, keeping all the different things in mind at the same time.
So whichever country you're with is part of the 80 plus countries that are the target market of Toolkit.law. Hopefully you found something here from Ruby Powers. Ruby, if they're looking for you, what's the web address for your firm?
RubyPowersLaw.com. So RubyPowers law.com is
And
probably the best way. Yeah.
we'll also be adding it to the video. So Ruby, thank you very much. And this concludes our presentation.
Thank you for having me.